What is going on, everyone? This is Miles with Windows Central Gaming, and today I am stoked to be joined by Matt Szep from Gun Interactive to talk about the upcoming asymmetrical multiplayer horror title, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. So first off, Matt, thanks so much time for showing me the ropes, carrying me to some victories in our play sessions, and sitting down to join me to answer some questions about this game.
I have to say, I was very impressed. You handled the gameplay session really well, and I'm sure, it's not going to surprise anybody who's watching that you, as Leatherface, managed to single-handedly kill every victim in the match. Yeah. So that's something to be proud of. That's not often.
Humble brag, but yes, I did get 100% of the kills when I played as Leatherface. Right. So think I'm ready for the big times. So
that's right.
I'm excited to have you because I'm a huge fan of horror. I'm a huge fan of this resurgence of asymmetrical horror multiplayer titles that we've seen in recent years. And it's a really great time to be a horror fan. So what I'm curious about when we look at all the potential IP out there, what was the team's mantra for translating the Texas Chain Saw Massacre to a video game? And why did this particular IP resonate with the team?
Well, first off, it's important to note that at Gun, our mantra overall is authenticity. It's our core pillar here at Gun. It's the one thing that we take a lot of pride in. We try to make sure that when we get a game going based off of a franchise, that we study that franchise. The initial kind of pass is study that franchise to the point of obsessive knowledge of every little detail there. So obviously authenticity means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And to us, it's just trying to really drive into the source content, because there's a time, there's a place, there's a current tone, there's an atmosphere, there's the, everything that was going on in the 70s at the time that the Texas Chain Saw Massacre was filmed. All of that has to be there for it to be genuinely authentic. So it's not just, Leatherface should look like this. Cool, we're done, ship it. It's a matter of the flowers, the sounds, we traveled to Texas, so in those specific time periods, so we could shoot the exact wildflowers that would be present. We researched migratory patterns of birds, so the birds you hear outside of the house are the right. When you get to this level of obsessive about authenticity, it's a matter of building out that entire tone of that entire piece. So yeah, and obviously there's thematic elements in there too. You have to make sure that everything is believable to the world of the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. And so that really, I would say, is kind of what we were, constantly hammering on and repeating here, was how would these people act in this scenario, in that time period, in that location, in that, time and space that this all takes place.
Yeah, your team has done an excellent job showcasing the amount of detail. I love those side-by-side shots that you've demonstrated where you're really paying attention to all the subtle details. And that's especially important in horror, to have that, being able to put yourself in that position, being able to put yourself in the shoes of these individuals really helps you kind of get lost in that experience. So yeah, that's something I definitely noticed in the session, and it's definitely a really important thing when it comes to translating something that does exist and is established. You don't want to get caught in that uncanny valley where, it's close. It's close.
Right.
So like you said, authentic, I think, speaks beautifully to what I've experienced so far of Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
Well, and you know how those things can go. Authenticity is a tricky thing. If you get close without accomplishing the right feeling, exactly like you said, you have that moment where people go, oh, it looks like they tried to do this and they came up a tiny bit short. And that tiny bit, sometimes it's that last, couple inches of stretch of road that really makes or breaks it. And so that's something that I think that not only is a mantra around here, but it's something that we all take a lot of pride in.
For better or worse, people are very passionate about established franchises. So yeah, it's great to hear that.
Us too. You started this off by talking about being a horror fan and how it's a good time for a horror fan. This building is made of horror fans. There's nobody in here that isn't a rabid horror fan. So, we understand that 100%. We understand that they expect that and they deserve that. And so, I'm biased. I work here. I love what we do here. But I have to say, I think that Gunn are the right kinds of people to handle something like that, because we are all made up of fans as well.
Yeah.
So
Love hearing that. So as I touched on, we've seen this resurgence of asymmetrical horror titles. We've had Evil Dead the Game, Friday the 13th previously, which Gunn was involved with. We have Killer Clowns from Outer Space on the horizon. In your eyes, what sets the Texas Chainsaw Massacre apart from stuff that we've seen in the past?
I would say, number one, there's a lot of the things, if you want to zoom out, a lot of the things that set the film apart, really, because the film is such an important key component to all of this. Again, the natural segue from talking about authenticity into this topic is the film itself. If we're authentic to that, the film itself stands out from everything else that's in the landscape. It stands out from everything else ever, really. I mean, let's just be honest. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is, it's a work of art. It's a masterpiece of horror. So the source material obviously makes it stand out, but also some of the elements like how we decided to take our approach with asymmetry in this, with 3 versus 4 structure, the fact that the victims are extremely limited in how they can fight back, and they're facing off against killers who are obviously very brutal, makes it sound like killers are at this wild advantage. But by the same note, the victims are wily and a little more, they can give the family the slip a little easier. So I think that the 3 versus 4 dynamic, while it's definitely a tricky one to wrap your head around, the way it works just works so well for what we're doing here, and it's creating a really interesting tone to the game. You can get into mechanics with 3 versus 4 and then back out into the ether of thematic elements, like the tension that you feel when you have a little tiny bottle of health and a lockpick, and there's a guy with a chainsaw in the next room. That's going to invoke certain feelings in people. So again, I think our structure for asymmetry is unique and interesting. I think the fact that we have limitations and exceptions in there. I've said before that we give the player a lot of lateral room to move within kind of their archetypes, and I think that lateral movement allows for seemingly a ton of things while also feeling kind of restricted. And it's a very delicate thing to do. And it's a lot of like pinch of spice kind of things that the team had constantly kind of dreamt up, iterated on, play tested, ironed out, iterated again, dreamt up a new element. So yeah, this is the culmination of many years of hard work and a lot of exceptional design from our team here and our team across over in the UK at Sumo Digital. So
yeah, I'm really glad you touched on that, because when I first saw this project and it was first officially revealed that this would be a 3 versus 4 multiplayer title, that was my first thought. That idea that, in previous titles, it's already hard to win as the survivor when there's only one big baddie, and now we have 3. Now it's just 3 people versus 4 random, helpless teens. Like, how's that going to play out? And yeah, getting your head.
And we name them victims from the rip, so it doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not called survivors. They're called victims in this, which I love. A really great detail, because that's in the world of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Chances are, if you go into that house, you're not making it out. And so I love that. And I'm glad you touched on that. And you touched on this a little bit, but I would like to know, what was the team's approach to balancing that idea? And when you were first going to the drawing board and saying, we want to have multiple killers, what was that conversation like?
Anybody from Gunn will tell you that when you talk about Texas as a property, staying authentic to that, the family matters in that. When you watch the original film, the 1974 original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it wasn't quite so leaning on villain worship like a lot of other horror movies from later years and so on. The Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger type villain worship, where they were really kind of the hero, and the people that they killed were kind of, for better or worse, disposable, with the exception of a few, right? Everybody knew Freddy Krueger, Jason, Michael Myers. They knew those folks. And so naturally, they knew Leatherface in the same way. But in that original film, they all play a role. And something that I actually, we discussed in your pre-game kind of warm-up conversation is everybody in our game plays a role. And so, it was very early on that we said, we have to have the whole family involved, because at the time, the cook plays a role of being kind of like the harbinger out, away from the home more. The hitchhiker is a little bit of a kind of scout type and a little wiry, and he has a role within that family. And then obviously Leatherface has a very defined role in the family. But if you took Leatherface without the cook and the hitchhiker, it would be a very different scene, a very different movie. So right off the rip, we were like, well, we have to incorporate, cook and hitchhiker in that, and preferably incorporate Grandpa, which we ended up doing. So we knew kind of where our heads were at as far as aggressor side, head count. And so when we put it together, and then right then and there, we kind of said, well, okay, so they're a family and this is how they operate. Everybody has a job to do. So let's refer to them as family. And the nice thing about working with something like this is that pre like development kind of research that you do that I touched on earlier. It puts you in the headspace of all of this. So then you start thinking, okay, so then if we're going to have 3, then they all have to have a separate role. And how are we going to make sure that they're, somewhat restricted from what they can do? So it's not just this crushing force. Obviously you don't want to have, a situation where we take what the kind of formula of, say, a Friday the 13th and just put 2 more Jasons in there, because you would end up with a nightmare on your hands for balancing. So, basically the short answer is it had to be a family, because family is important in the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. And it, as far as balancing it, it's been a lot of iteration. We've had years on this project working on this, and, from paper to prototype to where we're at now, where we can get in there and a lot of the details are in there and we can continue to iterate on it. So it's, I wouldn't call it an easy task, but by the same note, at Gun, we don't really think of things in terms of easy versus hard. We think of things in terms of what's going to make this the most Texas it can be. And so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's no brainer, really. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, in my experience with this, yeah, it was really interesting to have those defined roles. And as you touched on, when you play as the cook, you're kind of just an old dude. You're not that intimidating. You're not that powerful, but you still have use when you're combining yourself with Leatherface and the hitchhiker, who the hitchhiker is way more nimble, can kind of act almost in line with the survivors. And then Leatherface is just a towering brute that's just there to clean up, get the job done. But like you said, alone, they're pretty easy to overcome. So you really need to have that family synergy to actually efficiently take down the survivors, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I would say that Leatherface is the most powerful character without a doubt, but all it takes is a crawl space, and Leatherface is now rendered useless if it's not for the hitchhiker or the cook. The victims can break line of sight from the family in that way. If a hitchhiker is on their tail, they can only break line of sight in a very few ways, because hitchhiker can do most of the same moves that the victims can. Now, if the cook is doing his job and using his scanning and all of that, they can't ever really break from him. It's just a matter of who he, gets a target lock on and who he doesn't. So when they all work together, you have cook telling you where they're at. You have hitchhiker chasing them through all of the tiniest corridors, and then you have them eventually running into the wall, which was actually your words when you were playing Leatherface. I was playing hitchhiker. I chased them straight to you, and they just walked into the end of the saw, and you were able to get the kill on them. And again, it's just authentic Texas on a small rural farm in the 70s. Everybody has a job to do, whether you're cannibals or you're cattle ranchers. Everyone has a job to do.
Yeah, another thing that I really loved is the dynamic between the environments. So you obviously start in the cellar, the basement. It's bloody. There's dismembered limbs everywhere. And then if you get to the top and you manage to get outside, it's just this beautiful sunset. You have sunflowers in the distance, and there's this cool dynamic between you running, trying to get to freedom, and the horror and the beauty of the scene. So how important was that to the overall presentation for Texas Chain Saw Massacre?
Well, it's the game should play kind of like a movie, and you should have your acts in there and your beginning, middle, end. And I like to think that the game does play that way. You go from stark differences. When you're in the basement, it's very dreary. It's very drab. You think, I'm never going to get out of here. And when you do, you get into the second floor where it's still pretty dark and dreary. It's full of chicken feathers and bones and horrible things, but there are those rays of light coming in reminding you, hey, you're a bit closer to the light. And when you bust out into that sun, it's, obviously that's a kind of cathartic moment. So you get that kind of Sally Hardesty experience in each match if you make it all the way there. So now, I mean, when thinking in terms of creating mini movies, I've said this a few times, and I really feel this is the way we, this would be a good way to explain what we do here. When you're thinking in terms of, we don't want to make anything too gamey, right? We want to make something that feels like a movie that you're experiencing. That's what the interactive, in my mind, means. So yeah, in order to make an interactive movie that you're the star of, we have to think about it in ways of the set and the area and the surroundings all being a part of that. And so it starts out pretty dismal. You're on a hook and you wake up, you come to inside the belly of this beast of a house. And then the progression that it takes to get out of there. And there's nothing quite like dying in a Texas sunrise.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think you killed someone in a field of sunflowers in our play session, and you commented on it, and I was like, yeah, that to me, blood on the sunflowers. That's like at full sunrise, blood on the sunflowers. That's there you go. That's perfect Texas movie moment for you.
Exactly.
So yeah, and trying to make that play across different maps, different times of day, as you might have seen our gas station maps at night. Our slaughterhouse is in the middle of the day sun, so it's a different type of complete sun. And I think players will be pleasantly surprised at the variety of tones, elements, themes, feelings that they get from the different areas of each map.
Nice. So games like Fortnite have kind of shifted expectations for every single multiplayer title that comes out now. Like, we've been introduced to this idea of just ongoing games, customization. Can you speak a little bit on what players can expect regarding those elements in Texas Chain Saw Massacre?
Well, the first and most important one is they can expect authenticity to the Texas franchise. Not to sound like a broken record, but when we talk about authenticity, we're not going to give, I've said this before when we were working on Friday the 13th, we're not going to give Jason roller skates, and we're not going to give Leatherface a tutu. Obviously we're going to make sure that the things are on brand and appropriate to not only the era and tone and times and all of that, but, make sure that anything that we even, potentially humor to do is going to be in line with that and from an authenticity standpoint. But, I will leave it there because obviously we've got a lot more to talk about, but really, what it comes down to is, we hope that, and we feel genuinely in our heart of hearts that Texas has a long future. So
last question, just for fun here for you. Obviously, the team is focused on Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Everyone, all eyes, all hands on that. But if you had free reign and there were no licensing headaches, no licensing nightmares, what is the next franchise you'd want to see adapted into asymmetrical horror?
Now, are you asking me, or are you asking me what Gunn thinks?
I guess you can give me both if you want. I'm sitting down with you, so I want to know what you think, but
I would be loath to answer for Gunn because I know that, again, like I said, and this isn't lip service, everybody here is a massive horror fan. And I don't think I could speak for them without somebody getting mad at me tomorrow when we have lunch.
How dare you?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not gonna. But for me, I don't know. I mean, it's such a tough question. And, I'm trying to find words to buy myself some more time, and there aren't any. So, I would say that one of my all-time favorite movies is Hellraiser. I love Hellraiser, and I think that there's probably a lot of room there for something really cool. I also am a rabid fan of The Return of the Living Dead.
Yes.
I grew up a punk rocker, and loving horror movies. And so for me, it was like, the minute those two things kind of came together, I had friends who were just like, and you've never seen Return of the Living Dead? You have to watch this movie. So I did. And I've been in love with it ever since. I watch it to this day, probably once a month, at least, obsessively. It's my favorite movie of all time. I have multiple tattoos dedicated to Return of the Living Dead, the whole bit. So yeah, I would say either of those would be a home run for me, but probably slight edge to Return of the Living Dead.
I love that you said that because I have a short list of franchises that I'd want to see converted. Night of the Living Dead is totally one of them, and you could you could have so much fun with you as you touched on the punk rock setting of that game. That would be such an amazing asymmetrical horror title. And we did get a The Thing video game, I think on original Xbox and PS2, but I think that's another IP that would translate perfectly to asymmetrical horror. You have,
especially with a lot of the cool things you're seeing out there right now that people have really taken to, you know, the werewolf kind of style of gameplay, the who's the baddie kind of style of gameplay, and Among Us does that so well. When you look at those core concepts, it's like, yeah, somebody's gonna. And honestly, again, to just speak as a horror fan, I'm just enjoying this moment. We're seeing a Killer Clowns game come. The Evil Dead game just came out. There's like all this great stuff going on, and yeah. So you know, it's tricky because it's like, yeah, I would love for Gunn to make every horror movie into a game, but by the same note, I'm enjoying just watching these things get made and thinking, wow, there was a time, you know, not all that, you know, far before Friday the 13th that people were like, yeah, you can't play as killers in slasher movies. That's not a thing that you can, no one's going to fund that. No one will pay for that. You can't get that game made. You know, I personally had those conversations with friends and colleagues where people said, yeah, I would say things like, why can't you play as ... insert slasher killer? And they'd say, because nobody's going to pay you to make that. There's no way to get any funding for that. They're like, no one will ever, that's like a murder sim, man. You're weird. And I felt ashamed of like even pitching that, you know, but now it's like, hey man, anything's possible. You know what I mean? Hellraiser, I want to play as Pinhead. I want to skin people and put hooks in their faces. Let's go. And it's just, these are things that happen now. So I'm just pumped being a horror fan. So yeah, like I said, as much as I would love to see Gunn make every single one of those movies, I'm just happy we're getting so much content as horror fans. And it's really a wonderful time to be part of our spooky club. Yeah.
I think when the Killer Clowns from Outer Space video game was announced, that's the moment where I said, anything is possible. Like of all of the IP and like, I love that movie. I'm a huge fan of that movie. Yeah. But if you gave me 100 guesses to guess that as an asymmetrical horror multiplayer title coming out, I don't know if it would be in the 100. And so the idea that people are willing to take those risks and sit down and say, how would this work? What would this look like? Can we make this fun? Yeah, like you said, I'm just kicking back. I'm just enjoying all of this horror content, and it's a great time to see the genre kind of flourish in this new age.
We have the door kicked open on things right now, and so honestly, it's up to the folks making these games to just continue walking through it. The door's kicked wide open. Let's just keep doing it. Let's just, you know, I'm here for more horror.
Yeah, strike while the iron's hot. Let's go.
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right, Matt. Thanks so much for taking the time to sit down and chat with me. Really appreciate it. I had a ton of fun in my session. Blasting through windows as the survivors, stabbing people with little bone shards as the killers. Obviously,
can I just say real quick? I said I'm going out the window, and you said, "Did you just jump out the window?" And I was like, "Yeah." And you were like, "I can jump out the window?" Yeah. And then you jumped out the window. That was such a cool moment because I panicked. I jumped out the window, and hearing the realization in your voice where you're like, "You can jump out the window?" I said, "Yeah." And you're right behind me. So
it's such a simple thing because you see it in movies all the time, but rarely in a game setting outside of a scripted moment do you have that opportunity to just blast through a window, and it's satisfying. I gotta say,
I loved it. It was great to hear that in your voice because I was like, that's so cool because that's that moment of realization that, you know, a mechanic is absolutely worth it to be there and make sense. So.
Yeah, so stoked for this. This is coming sometime in 2023. This is coming to Xbox Game Pass as well, which is pretty awesome. And I'm super stoked for this release. And I'm really grateful for you taking some time. And I appreciate everyone tuning in and listening and watching along. So thanks so much. And we will catch you in the next video. Take care, everybody.